So what is gaslighting someone? That's this week's topic, because gaslighting is a very toxic form of emotional abuse and manipulation that makes you feel crazy. So in this video, you're going to learn what gaslighting someone means and what it looks like, and also the signs of gaslighting so that you can avoid it in your own relationships. But first, my name's Michelle Ferris. I'm a psychotherapist and I love helping people create relationships that work. And be sure to stay until the end, where I talk about the antidote of what you absolutely need to cultivate in order to avoid gaslighting. So what is gaslighting? It's basically a toxic behavior where someone purposely sets out to create self-doubt of your own perceptions, your own reality, so that they can gain control over you. And this is a very dysfunctional behavior that tends to show up with three different types of people. The narcissistic person does this. The person who lacks accountability, such as a sociopath, or someone who absolutely refuses to look at their own behavior, and people who are addicted to alcohol and other substances can also do gaslighting behaviors. The narcissist gaslights you because they want to feel superior and put you in the one down position. They also want you to do what they want you to do because they have no ability to be able to negotiate in relationship. Someone who lacks accountability is not going to be able to tolerate you having a different point of view. They're going to feel threatened by that. And the narcissist and the person who lacks accountability will want to use gaslighting so that you do what they want you to do, because they can't look at their own behavior. This also shows up with alcoholics and addicts because they do it to try to get the focus off of their using or their addictive behavior. Because if they can blame you and make you feel crazy, then they don't have to look at their own addiction. So gaslighting keeps the focus off of somebody's toxic behavior, and they actually turn it around on you so that you take responsibility for the problems in the relationship or the problems that the other person is having, rather than them being accountable for their own life. This is a very toxic behavior. When there's gaslighting, you're seen as the problem, versus in a healthy relationship, both people are willing to see their own relationship behavior and confront it independently, not blame each other for what's happening in the relationship. So how does gaslighting start? It basically starts in childhood, where your caregivers either minimize or deny your perception of reality. So maybe you grew up in a dysfunctional family where there was alcoholism or there was rage and nobody talked about it. So you started to feel like you were crazy because nobody acknowledged your reality, even though there was somebody screaming or somebody was drunk a lot and nobody acknowledged it. Those are very detrimental experiences as children, because it goes to the core of being able to trust what you see and what you experience. So people who are gaslit in dysfunctional families, which is very common, end up being more susceptible to being gaslit as adults, because when we grow up with a behavior, whether or not it's functional or dysfunctional, it feels familiar. So we don't necessarily recognize it as dysfunctional. And that's why we tend to believe gaslighting in our relationships, because if our feelings were denied as kids and we were told we were too sensitive or we were the difficult one, and we hear that same thing from our partner in our marriages, then we tend to believe those messages because they're familiar and we've heard them before, but we may not make that connection between the present day and childhood. If you experienced gaslighting as a child, say me too in the comments, because you're not alone. A lot of us are right there with you. So why do people gaslight you? People gaslight others because they can't tolerate to look at their own behavior, and they don't have healthy relationship skills. So the way they do relationship is by controlling you and by making sure that they feel superior. So people who gaslight others tend to not be able to tolerate being wrong or being perceived as imperfect in any way. So what they do is they make you wrong so that they can be right. That's the only way they can have self-esteem. So let's talk about some examples of gaslighting, because I want to make sure you recognize it. So the first way people can gaslight you is finding fault in you. And they do this because, again, it avoids them looking at themselves. So if they say something like, "You're the one who's getting mad, I'm fine," even though they raged 5 minutes ago. But because they're calm in the moment, you feel crazy. You feel like, oh my God, I am yelling. It's true. So you glob on to that gaslighting behavior and think it's true about you. because the second way they do it is they use your words against you. So if you were just angry or you didn't show up, they will say, well, you didn't show up today. I was supposed to meet you at 2 o'clock. You're a liar because you didn't show up. And you might say to yourself, oh my God, I didn't show up. Maybe I am a liar. And it's crazy making. Because that person uses your words and your actions against you, it is really hard to detach from this kind of gaslighting. Now, another example of gaslighting is when they belittle your feelings and they say, I don't know what you're so upset about. Everything's fine. But again, 20 minutes later, they were blaming you and making you wrong. But in the moment, they're saying to you, what you're saying doesn't make any sense. And they might even say that. You're crazy. You're being way too sensitive. I don't know why you're so upset. Everything is fine. And instead of honoring your feelings and being able to say, wow, why are you so upset? Because in a healthy relationship, that's what happens. But when you're gaslit, they feel threatened by your feelings because they don't want to deal with them. The only feelings the person who gaslights want to deal with is their own. And the way they stay calm and the way they stay functional is by making sure they don't have to deal with anybody else's. And if they can be right all the time, then they stay in their comfort zone. Another way they can gaslight you is by overreacting to your feedback and taking it as criticism even when it's not. So maybe you're talking to your mate and you're saying, you know, I'm really concerned. I don't like the way you talk to me in front of my family. I was really embarrassed. And they basically come back and say, well, basically you're saying I'm a terrible person. So that's how they gaslight you, by making it so overblown. But because there's a grain of truth in it, because you are upset about how they treated you, you think you're wrong. So they take a little bit of feedback and blow it up into this big, awful remark that destroys their self-esteem. So there's a lot of black and white thinking and catastrophizing that can go along with gaslighting, which is very hurtful to be on the receiving end of that. Another way people might gaslight you is keeping score by saying something like, well, if you hadn't yelled at me, I wouldn't have had to hit you. And it's crazy, because no one deserves to be abused or hit. But again, when there's gaslighting behaviors, we end up seeing the grain of truth in what they're saying and using that to punish ourselves and actually believe what they're saying, instead of realizing that what they're saying is highly abusive and much more indicative about what their struggles are psychologically than who you are as a person. So how do you know if you're being gaslit? Well, the first thing is you don't trust yourself. You constantly worry about saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing. Because when you're in a relationship with someone who's gaslighting you, they're going to do this a lot because they feel completely threatened by you having any type of different opinion. So being in a relationship with someone who gaslights you means that you will eventually learn to completely dismiss your own thoughts and feelings. And you'll actually come to rely on that other person to dictate your reality, because that's how the relationship works. You might start questioning everything you say and everything you think because suddenly you think it's probably going to be wrong, versus really being able to trust your own perceptions. And again, if this starts in childhood, there's usually a long history of feeling gaslit and not being able to trust yourself. So let's get to the antidote of how you can prevent yourself from being gaslit in relationships. It's basically by cultivating self-trust. And how you do that is you have to be able to shift the focus. Instead of paying attention to what they're saying to you, I want you to immediately, when you're being gaslit, focus on your own reactions, because your body is going to hold what's happening for you. And that's where the truth lies. So for instance, if my partner is gaslighting me and I immediately feel bad, I might have stomach ache. I might have some muscle tension, or my throat is closing because I feel suffocated. Those are all signs. If I can walk away and take a break, that's my truth. That's a sign that something isn't right. Because what I don't want you to do is get caught up in what the person who's gaslighting you is saying, because you're going to believe it. Instead, I want you to go into your body and say, okay, what is my reaction right now? Because that reaction is telling you something isn't right. What they're telling you is not your truth. It's their way of manipulating you. And that's the easiest way to stop gaslighting, is to go into your own reaction and response physiologically, because our bodies have a reaction, and use that to cultivate self-trust. because if you have a stomach ache, if you have a knot in your stomach, or you have muscle tension, those are all signs that tell you something isn't okay. And that you need to trust. Instead of trusting what's being said to you, you need to trust your own emotional or physical experiences. Now, the next step for you is I do have a self-trust journal that's going to walk you through how to cultivate self-trust, because that's the best thing you can do to heal from gaslighting. Thanks so much.